Okay, welcome to a little discussion on cost of inflation. These are costs that are beyond the actual cost of the currency losing money because of inflation. These are costs that occur and impact businesses and individuals. So we're going to run through some of these. First one we're going to talk about is the menu cost. You can see the definition there. They're costs associated with changing a firm's listed price or price lists or catalog or whatever. Obviously, in this day and age, it's a little bit easier to make changes online. But nonetheless, if you have especially creeping or hyperinflation, creeping inflation being about 10% a month, hyperinflation, usually we say that is 50% or more a month. This can have some serious costs just because you have to keep up with all the price changes. So we have a list of countries here, and you can see the inflation rate and then the average inflation rate. So the inflation rates for let me move this out of the way here. The inflation rates for 2000 and the average inflation rates for the 7-year period following. So the question down here is, given the expected relationship between average inflation and menu costs, rank the countries in descending order of menu costs using average inflation over the period 2000 to 2007. So what they're saying here is, which country are you going to have business people doing the most work to change prices? Okay. So go ahead and pause this, think about it, come back in a minute, and I'll give you the answers. Okay, so for this particular problem, the country that's going to have the least changes would be Japan. So they're suffering actually from deflation. They still suffer from deflation throughout this period. It's just not a very high rate of deflation. The next one would be China. China has a little bit of inflation, but on average, they're not going to have to make many changes. After that would be France, and it's also a very consistent inflation rate throughout this period for France. After France would be Brazil. A little higher, it is important to note that they do not change very much over the 7-year period. Indonesia, it almost, well, a little more than doubles during this time period between the initial and then the average. But 8.8% a year, that does mean quite a few price changes. The next one would be Turkey. And although you see a significant drop in their inflation rate, as far as the average goes, still seeing 27.8% inflation means a lot of price changes. And Zimbabwe is just a mess. It's 904% a year on average. They're changing prices on a daily basis, if not more often. Next one, also associated with menu costs. During a high inflation period in Israel during the mid-1980s, grocery stores hired extra stocking clerks and restaurants to use chalkboards instead of menus. How is this evidenced in menu cost? So Israel had creeping inflation about 10% a month. You have to have some adjustments. These are menu costs. So how are these two actions, hiring extra store clerks and using chalkboards instead of menus, evidence of menu costs? Go ahead and pause it, come up with your answer, and I'll give you the correct one. Okay, so two things going on here with the extra stocking clerks. That basically is evidence that they're going to have to make a lot of price changes. If you go to a grocery store, everything has a price, whether it's on the shelf or on the product itself. So this is an additional cost to the grocery stores, just having to hire more labor to keep up with all the price changes. Restaurants, most, especially good restaurants, have to use fresh food. And fresh food is going to be very volatile and change, perhaps on a daily basis. If you're relying on fresh fish, the prices could be going up on a daily basis. Fruits and vegetables, who knows? These prices change quite a bit. So from the business's perspective, this is a way to minimize menu costs by simply doing away with printed menus and just using a chalkboard. So again, an extra cost to the firm. Get this out of the way here. This is about costs to borrowers and lenders. Another, we talked about this in class, another cost that results from inflation. So using the same data as used on the first one, it says rank the countries in order of inflation rates that most favor borrowers with 7-year loans were taken out in 2000. Assume that the expected inflation rate was the inflation rate in 2000. So in other words, people took out these loans thinking, all right, well, here's the inflation rate, and then the average for some of them stayed the same, and the average for some of them changed. So you have to think about overall during that 2000 to 2007 period, if they had a 7-year loan, were borrowers better off or worse off? Go ahead and hit pause. Rank the countries. It says in the sorry, most favored borrowers. So go ahead and pause. Okay, so we're going to put these in order. Zimbabwe is actually number one here because they have the worst inflation rate. So if you borrowed money in 2000 and you had a 904% average inflation rate, you're paying back money that's worth a lot less. Turkey is number two. Yeah, Turkey sees a significant amount of disinflation, which means the inflation rate is less. They're still paying back lira at the time that are worth quite a bit less. Number three would be Indonesia. They experience some inflation and they're going to be paying back Indonesian rupees at a lower amount, or sorry, they'd be worth less than they were before. Brazil, although it's a steady inflation rate, you're still seeing 7.3% every year, so they're paying back real that are worth less. Fifth would be steady Eddie France here, who does not see a lot of inflation, but regardless, compared to the last two, they have to pay a little bit less in inflation. China would be next, and then Japan is last. Japan's deflation means they're paying back yen that are worth more. Now, the deflationary rate dropped on average over the 7-year period, but they're still paying back yen that are worth more than they were when they got the loan. Okay. Let's get rid of that. So, did borrowers who took out 7-year loans in Japan gain or lose overall versus lenders? They lost. Now, they didn't lose as badly as they thought they were going to, given the inflation rate in 2000, but they still are paying back yen that are worth more. Now, having said that, it's important to note that Japanese interest rates of banks were around 0% throughout this decade, and that's because Japanese bankers knew that the yen was going to be worth more than when they made that loan initially. So that actually benefits them. Thanks a lot, and pay attention for your next lesson on costs that occur from inflation coming soon.